Chapter 27. Sibling's Dinner. It's simply sharp and incisive. Klein burst out in laughter. Using the rich experience he had from his previous incarnation, he added another insult. In fact, there is no evidence to suggest that those important figures have any brains at all. Good! Very good! Benson roared with laughter as he gave a thumbs up. Klein, you are a lot more humorous than before. After taking a breath, he continued. I have to go to the pier in the afternoon. I'm only off work tomorrow. After that, I'll have time to go to Tingen City Housing Improvement Company with the both of you. Let's see if they have cheap and good terrace houses for rent. Also, I need to pay Mr. Frankie a visit. Our landlord? The perplexed Klein asked. Does our current landlord have some terrace houses from pretty good districts under his name? Benson shot his brother a glance and said, amused, Have you forgotten the 1-year rental contract we have with him? It has only been 6 months. Hiss. Klein immediately drew a gasp of cold air. He had really forgotten the matter. Although rent was paid once a week, the lease was a year long. If they were to move now, it was equivalent to a breach in contract. If they were taken to court, they would have to compensate large sums of money. You are still lacking in societal experience. Benson touched his receding black hairline and said wistfully, This was a clause I fought so hard back then. If not, Mr. Frankie was only willing to lease it to us for 3 months each contract. To those with money, landlords would sign leases for a year, 2 years, or even 3 years to seek stable income. But for us, the past us, and our neighbors, landlords would have to be constantly worried that something bad might happen, depriving them of their rent. Therefore, they would only sign short-term contracts. In that case, they can offer to raise prices according to the situation. Klein summarized and added, using the original Klein's memories and his own experience as a tenant. Benson sighed and said, This is the cruel reality of today's society. All right, you don't have to worry. The issue with the contract can be easily resolved. To be frank, even if we owe him a week's rent, Mr. Frankie would have immediately thrown us out and confiscated whatever valuable items we have. After all, his intelligence is below that of a monkey's. There's no way he can comprehend overly complicated matters. Upon hearing this, Klein suddenly recalled a particular Sir Humphrey's meme. He shook his head and said seriously, No, Benson, you are wrong. Why? Benson was puzzled. Mr. Frankie's intelligence is still slightly higher than a monkey's, Klein replied in all seriousness. Just as Benson seemed to smile in response, he added, If he is on form. Ha ha. Benson lost it and burst out in laughter. After a series of rapturous laughter, he pointed at Klein, momentarily unable to put his thoughts in words. Only then, he returned to the topic at hand. Of course, as a gentleman, we cannot employ such shameless tactics. I will discuss this with Mr. Frankie tomorrow. Believe me, he's easily convinced. Easily. Klein had no doubts regarding Benson's point. The existence of the gas pipes was excellent proof. After some idle chatter between the brothers, the remnants of pan-fried fish from the previous night were made into a soup with some vegetables. During the boiling process, the steam moistened the rye bread. Smearing a little butter on the bread, Klein and Benson had a simple meal, but they were very satisfied with it. After all, the fragrance and sweetness of butter brought them endless aftertastes. After Benson left, Klein headed to the lettuce and meat market with 3 solely notes and some spare pennies. He spent 6 pence on a pound of beef and 7 pence on a fresh and succulent fish with few bones. Additionally, he bought potatoes, peas, radishes, rhubarbs, lettuce, and turnips, as well as spices such as rosemary, basil, cumin, and cooking oils. During this entire time, he continued to feel like he was being watched, but there was no physical interaction. After spending some time at Smyron Bakery, Klein returned home and began weightlifting with heavier items, such as books, to train his arm strength. He had planned to exercise by military boxing, which he learned from his compulsory military stint for students. However, he had already forgotten the radio exercise routines from school, much less boxing, which was only taught during the military stints. Exasperated, he could only do something simpler. Klein did not overexert himself since it would lead to fatigue and thus put him in greater danger. He took an appropriate break and began reading the original Klein's notes and study material. He wished to read anything regarding the Fourth Epoch again. In the evening, Benson and Melissa sat in front of a desk. The food was placed neatly like children in upper primary school. The fragrances of the dishes were composed of a rich melody of scents. The sole, captivating fragrance of the stewed beef, the obviously tender potatoes, the sweetness of the thick pea soup, the mellow flavors of the stewed rhubarb, and the sweetness of the buttered rye bread. Benson gulped a mouthful of saliva as he turned around to see Klein placing a crispy fish onto a plate. He felt the fragrance of the oil permeate through his nostrils into his throat, and then into his stomach. Groan. His stomach made a distinct protest. Klein rolled up his sleeves and held up a plate of fried fish before placing it in the middle of the tidied desk. Following that, he returned to the cupboard and took out 2 large cups of ginger beer and placed them where he and Benson sat. He smiled at Melissa and took out a lemon pudding as if he were performing a magic trick. "We'll have beer, while you'll have this." "Thank you." Melissa took the lemon pudding. When Benson saw this, he raised his calm and said with a smile, "This is to celebrate Klein's finding of a decent job." Klein raised his cup and clinked it with Benson before clinking it with Melissa's lemon pudding. "Praise the lady!" Gulp. He tilted his head back and drank it down. The spicy feeling warmed his gullet, bringing him great aftertastes. Despite its name, ginger beer did not contain any alcohol. It was a mixture of the ginger's spiciness and the sourness of lemon that made it taste similar to beer. It was a kind of beverage that both women and children found acceptable. However, Melissa did not like the taste of it. "Praise the lady!" Benson drank a mouthful as well, while Melissa took a nibble of the lemon pudding. She chewed at it repeatedly before swallowing it down unwillingly. "Give it a try." Klein put down his cup and picked up his fork and spoon and pointed at the tableful of food. He was most pessimistic of his thick pea soup. After all, he had never eaten something so strange on Earth. All he could do was adapt the recipe from the original Klein's memory fragments. As the eldest brother, Benson did not stand on ceremony as he dug up a spoonful of mashed potatoes and stuffed it into his mouth. The beaten potatoes were boiled thoroughly and mixed with the faint taste of lard and just enough salt. It whetted his appetite and made him salivate. "Not bad." "Not bad," praised Benson vaguely. "It's much more delicious than the one I had back at work. They only used butter. This is one of my specialties, after all." Klein accepted the praise. "It's all thanks to the teachings of the chef at Welch's place." Melissa looked at the beef soup. The green basil leaves, the green lettuce heads, and the radishes were submerged in the colorless soup, covering the tender beef. The soup was clear, and its fragrance tantalizing. She forked a piece of beef and placed it in her mouth to chew. The beef retained a little chewiness despite being stewed tender. The mixture of salt, the sweetness from the radishes, and the spiciness from the basil leaves complemented the deliciousness of the beef. She seemed to give her approbation, but she could not stop her chewing. Klein tasted it and felt that although it was delicious, it was not without regret. This was still far from his usual standard. After all, he was lacking in certain condiments and could only use replacements. It was no wonder it tasted different. Of course, even with the best standards, one could only make do with the dishes they cooked personally. Suddenly, his heart pained for Benson and Melissa, who were stunted in their worldview. After swallowing a piece of beef, Klein picked up a piece of fried tussock fish, which was sprinkled with cumin and rosemary. It was crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. The char was a perfect golden brown, and the saltiness and oil fragrance intertwined as one. Nodding slightly, Klein tried a piece of stewed rhubarb and found it palatable. It got rid of the cloyed taste of meat. Finally, he mustered his courage and scooped a bowl of thick pea soup. Too sweet and too sour. Klein could not help but frown. However, after seeing Benson and Melissa looking satisfied from tasting it, he began suspecting his tastes. He could not help but down a mouthful of ginger beer to cleanse his tongue. The siblings were stuffed by the end of the meal. They laid, slumped in the chairs for quite a while. "Let us praise the lady once more." Benson raised his ginger beer, which had only one mouthful left, as he said in satisfaction, "Praise the lady." Klein downed the last bit of his beverage. "Praise the lady." Melissa finally put the last bit of lemon pudding into her mouth and enjoyed the flavors swishing through her mouth. When Klein saw this, he took advantage of his tipsiness and smiled. "Melissa, that's not right. You should eat the thing you find most delicious thing at the beginning. That way, you can fully appreciate its most delicious aspects. Tasting it when you are filled and satiated will not do the food justice." "No, it's still as delicious as it can be," answered Melissa firmly and stubbornly. The siblings had a happy chat, and after digesting their meals, they cleaned up the plates, cutlery, and stored the oil which was used to fry the fish. After busying themselves, it was revision time. One refreshed his accounting knowledge, while another continued reading the study material and notes. Time was spent to its fullest. At 11, the siblings extinguished the gas lamp and went to bed after washing up. Klein felt groggy as he stared at the darkness in front of him. A figure wearing a black windbreaker and halved top hat appeared suddenly in Klein's vision. It was Dunn Smith. "Captain!" Klein jolted awake and knew he was dreaming. Dunn's gray eyes remained calm, as though he was mentioning something trivial. "Someone has sneaked into your room. Pick up your revolver and force him to the corridor. Leave the rest to us." "Someone has sneaked into my room? The observer has finally taken action?" Klein jumped in fright but did not dare ask further. All he did was nod and say, "All right." The scene before his eyes changed immediately as a swath of colors appeared like the bursting of bubbles. Klein's eyes opened as he carefully turned his head. He looked toward the window and saw a thin but unfamiliar back standing at his desk, rummaging for something in silence. Chapter 28. Secret. Order. Ba-dump! 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 Klein's heart began beating rapidly. It shrank into a clump before expanding abruptly. It made his body tremble gently. There was an instant when he nearly forgot what he had to do until the lurking figure suddenly paused. The figure pricked his ears slightly, as though listening for any changes. Blood flowed back from his brain as Klein regained his basic cognitive abilities. He reached beneath the pillow for the wooden grip of the revolver. He felt the firm but smooth feeling as he rapidly calmed down. He silently and slowly pulled out the revolver and aimed it at the trespasser's head. To be honest, he had no confidence in striking the intruder. Although he was already able to stably hit the target during practice, a moving person and a fixed target were completely different. He was not arrogant enough to confound the two together. However, he vaguely remembered something from his previous life. The general idea was that a nuclear weapon wielded the greatest strength before its launch. The principle held in his current situation. The best deterrence was before he shot. By not pulling the trigger or shooting blindly, the intruder was unable to determine whether or not he was a complete rookie who had an extremely high chance of missing him. His worries and fears would make him deliberate more, resulting in him restraining himself. In an instant, another thought arose in him. It immediately made Klein turn decisive. He was not the kind of person who turned calmer when faced with danger. Instead, he had already imagined the situation when he faced the observer, using intimidation instead of attacking. The Foodaholic Empire had an idiom: "Where there is precaution, there will be no danger." When Klein pointed his gun at the intruder, the thin man froze suddenly, as though he had sensed something. Following that, he heard a voice that hid a chuckle. "Good evening, sir." Person's head with the revolver, and tried to speak as leisurely and as naturally as he could. "Please raise both of your hands and turn around. Try to do it slow. To be frank, I am very timid and I get nervous easily. If you move too quickly, I can be frightened, and I can't guarantee that there won't be a situation where I misfire." "Yes, that's right." The scrawny man raised both of his hands and held them up near his head before turning his body bit by bit. The first thing that came into view was a black tight suit with neat buttons. Next, he caught a pair of brown eyebrows that were thick and sharp. The intruder's deep blue eyes didn't reflect fear, but rather gazed upon Klein with the intensity of a ferocious beast. It seemed that if Klein were careless for a second, the other person would leap forward and tear him to pieces. He clenched the handle tightly as he tried his best to appear calm and indifferent. It was only when the thin man faced him completely did Klein jerk his chin towards the door. He softly and gently said, "Sir, let's take this outside. Do not disturb the beautiful dreams of others. Oh, do keep your motions slow. Lighten your footsteps a little, too. It's basic courtesy for a gentleman." The thin man's cold pupils rolled as he swept Klein a glance. He continued raising his hands as he walked slowly to the door. Under the revolver's aim, he twisted the handle and slowly opened the door. When the door was half opened, he suddenly lowered himself and rolled forward. The door was pulled by a strong wind, and it closed with a slam. Benson, who was on the top bunk, was stirred. He almost woke up in a daze. At that moment, a leisurely and serene melody entered from outside. The heavy and comfortable voice started to sing. "Oh, the threat of horror! The hope of crimson cries! One thing at least is certain, that this life flies. One thing is certain, and the rest is lies. The flower that once has bloomed forever dies, one." The poem seemed to possess the power to calm and relax others. Benson, who was on the top bunk, and Melissa, who was in another room, again fell asleep amid their grogginess. Klein's body and mind was also peaceful and quiet. He nearly yawned. The way the thin man had darted off was so agile that he could not react in time. Looking at the closed door, he smiled and muttered to himself, "You might not believe it, but pulling the trigger would not release a round." The empty chamber, to prevent misfiring. Following that, Klein listened to the midnight poem as he patiently awaited for the battle outside to end. Within a minute, the tranquil melody, which resembled the reflection of moonlight on the surface of a lake, stopped and the dark night resumed its deep silence. Klein silently spun the cylinder and moved the empty chamber away as he awaited for the outcome. He uneasily waited for a full 10 minutes. Just as he wondered if he should investigate, he heard Dunn Smith's staid and warm voice from the door. "It's settled." Phew. Klein exhaled. He held his revolver and took his key. Barefooted, he carefully approached the door before silently opening it to see the black windbreaker and the halved top hat. Dunn Smith was standing there with his deep and calm gray eyes. He closed the door behind him and followed Dunn to the end of the corridor and stood amid the weak crimson moonlight. "It took me some time to enter his dream," said Dunn calmly, as he looked at the red moon outside the window. "Do you know his background?" Klein felt a lot more relieved. Dunn nodded and said, "An ancient organization known as the Secret Order. They were established in the Fourth Epoch and are related to the Solomon Empire and a number of fallen aristocrats of that period. The Antigonus family's diary came from them. Due to a member's negligence, it entered the antique market and was obtained by Welch. They had no choice but to send people in search of it." Without waiting for Klein's question, he paused before continuing. "We will capture the remaining members they have according to the clues. Well, it might not end too well. These fellows are as good at hiding as the rats in the sewers. But at the very least, they would believe that we have likely obtained the Antigonus family's notebook, or that we have obtained a critical clue. In that case, as long as it's not something extremely crucial or important, they would abandon the operation. That is their philosophy on surviving." "What if the notebook is extremely crucial and important?" asked Klein worriedly. Dunn smiled without an answer. Instead, he said, we know very little of the secret order. Our success this time is all thanks to your sharp wits. This contribution is all yours. In light of the possibility of hidden dangers and how heightened perception would aid in finding the notebook, you have a chance at choosing. A chance at choosing? Klein vaguely guessed something as his breathing subconsciously turned heavy. Dunn wiped the smile from his face as he said in all seriousness, "Do you wish to become a Beyonder? You can only choose the starting sequence of an incomplete sequence. Of course, you can give up this chance and choose to accumulate the merit you have garnered. Then all you have to do is wait till there's sufficient room for you to become a sleepless, which is also the first complete sequence the goddess has bestowed on the Nighthawks." Indeed. Klein felt delighted and did not have any hesitant emotions. He took the initiative to ask, "Then from which of the sequence 9s can I choose from? I have to have detailed information to decide whether to give up or accept, as well as choose which one." Dunn turned around and seemed to be cloaked in the crimson veil that shone down on him. He looked into Klein's eyes and said slowly, "Apart from the sleepless, the church has 3 sequence 9 potion formulas. One of them is Mystery Prior, which is also the power Old Neil controls. Heh, Roseanne has likely mentioned this to you. She can never hold her tongue." Klein smiled awkwardly, at a loss for an answer. Thankfully, Dunn did not mind it as he continued. "Our Mystery Prior potion formula and the later sequences that aren't directly chained were obtained from the Moses Ascetic Order. Back then, it was said that they had yet to fall to corruption. They persisted in their morals and precepts, determined in their pursuit of knowledge. They kept their secrets strictly confidential. Anyone that entered the order would be barred from speaking for 5 years after becoming a Mystery Prior. They would learn to keep silent so as to cultivate and enhance their focus. The motto of Moses Ascetic Order, 'Do as you wish, but do no harm,' began from them. Mystery Priors have a comprehensive but rudimentary understanding and grasp of magic, witchcraft, astrology, and other mystical knowledge. They also know a fair number of magical rituals, but they can easily sense certain existences that hide among matter. Therefore, they have to be careful and show respect to their powers as a Beyonder. We lack a large portion of this sequence, causing it to be an incomplete chain. For example, it's sequence 8. Of course, perhaps the Holy Cathedral has it. This pretty much meets all my requirements." Klein nodded slightly, to the point of having the urge to choose. Thankfully, he still remembered certain things. "What about the other 2? The second type is named Corpse Collector. Quite a number of cultists who worship death in the southern continent choose it. After consuming the potion, unintelligent dead spirits would mistake them as one of their kind and not attack them. They would gain resistance to the cold, decay, and corrosiveness of cadaveric auras. They will be able to directly see a portion of evil spirits and see the characteristics and weaknesses of undead creatures, as well as gain certain attribute enhancements. We have the sequence 8 and sequence 7 that follows it. Heh, you probably can guess sequence 7, Spirit Medium. This was chosen by Daly back then, described Dunn in detail. Spirit Medium does appear mysterious and cool, but what I want most is to grasp knowledge of mysticism." Klein did not interject. All he did was listen quietly. Dunn Smith looked sideways at the crimson moon and said, "We only have sequence 9 of the 3rd type. Whether the Holy Cathedral has it, I'm not sure. It's called Sear." Sear? Klein's pupils constricted as he recalled the regret Emperor Roselle had left in his diary. He regretted not choosing 2, an apprentice, bandit, or seer. Chapter 29. Jobs and rentals are serious. Business. Klein tried his best to remain his usual self as he asked with genuine interest, "What abilities do seers have?" "Your question is inaccurate. The question should be, what abilities does consuming the Sear potion give?" Dunn Smith shook his head and chuckled. His gray pupils and face turned away from the moon as his features hid in the shadows. "There are many kinds of things involved. Astromancy, cartomancy, spiritual pendulums, and scrying. Of course, it does not mean that consuming the potion will immediately allow you to grasp all of them. The potion only equips you with the qualifications and ability to learn it. As they lack direct means of fighting enemies, hey? You can probably imagine that setting up a magical ritual requires a lot of preparation. It's not suitable for combat. Therefore, in terms of knowledge of mysticism, a seer will be more learned and professional than a mystery prior. It sounds like it matches my requirements as well. However, the lack of means to directly deal with enemies is quite a dilemma. Furthermore, the Church of the Evernight Goddess likely doesn't have the subsequent sequence. The Holy Cathedral likely refers to the headquarters, the Cathedral of Serenity. The means available to low-sequence beyonders against their enemies might not be comparable to firearms. Klein fell into deep thought as he racked his brains. He kept going back and forth between mystery priors and seers. He no longer considered corpse collector. Dunn Smith smiled when he saw this. You don't have to rush into a decision. Tell me your answer. Monday morning. Regardless of your choice of sequence or giving up this opportunity, none of us from the Nighthawks would have any other thoughts on the matter. Calm down and ask your heart. With that said, he took off his hat and bowed slightly. He slowly walked past Klein and headed for the stairwell. Klein did not say a word and did not immediately reply. He silently bowed and watched as Dunn left. Although he was constantly hoping to become a Beyonder previously, he was thrown into a dilemma when the opportunity arose. The subsequent missing sequences, Beyonders having the risk of losing control, the believability of Emperor Roselle's diaries, and the illusory murmurs that could corrupt people into madness, all mixed together and formed a moat that obstructed his advancement. He took a deep breath and slowly breathed out. No matter how bad it is, it can't be worse than making an 18-year-old high school student decide on his future career. Klein gave a self-deprecating chuckle. Gathering his scattered thoughts, he opened the door softly and laid back on the bed. He laid there with his eyes open, silently looking at the bottom of the top bunk that was dyed with the faint crimson of the moon. A drunkard staggered outside the window as a carriage sped down the empty streets. These noises did not break the serenity of the night, but instead made it even darker and more distant. Klein's emotions settled down as he recalled his past on Earth. He recalled how he liked exercising, his father who always spoke loudly, his mother who enjoyed busying herself despite having a chronic disease, his friends who grew up with him, going from playing sports like soccer and basketball to games and mahjong, as well as the person he made a failed confession to. These were like a silent river. It did not have many ripples or deep sentimental feelings, but it silently drowned his heart. Perhaps one will only learn to cherish things after they have lost them. When the crimson receded and the sky turned golden yellow from the flaming ball's illumination, Klein had made his choice. He got out of bed and headed to the public bathroom to wash his face to wake himself up. Then he took a one-solely note to Mrs. Wendy's to buy 8 pounds of rye bread with 9 pence, replenishing the staple food that had been consumed the previous night. The price of bread has begun stabilizing, he commented after breakfast as Benson changed. It was Sunday, so both he and Melissa finally had the chance to rest. Klein, who was already in proper attire, was sitting on a chair and flipping through the outdated newspapers he brought back from yesterday. He said in surprise, "There's a house for rent here. North Boroughs, 3 Wendell Street, a bungalow with 2 floors. There are 6 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and 2 big balconies upstairs. Downstairs, there's a dining hall, a living room, a kitchen, 2 bathrooms, and 2 guest rooms, as well as an underground cellar. In front of the house are 2 acres of private land, and there's a small garden behind. It can be rented for 1, 2, or 3 years, with a weekly rent of £1.06 solely. Those interested can head to Champagne Street and look for Mr. Gusev. That's our goal for the future." Benson wore his black-halved top hat as he smiled to say, "The rent for the places in newspapers is usually a little too expensive. The Tingen City Housing Improvement Company has options that do not pale in comparison to that for cheaper. Why are we not searching in the Tingen Housing Improvement Association for the working class?" Melissa walked out from her room, holding an old, veiled hat. She had changed into a grayish-white long dress that had been mended several times. She was silent and introverted, but that could not mask her youthfulness. Benson laughed. "Where did you hear of the Tingen Housing Improvement Association for the Working Class?" "Jenny? Mrs. Rochelle? Or is it from your good friend Selena?" Melissa looked to the side and whispered a reply. "Mrs. Rochelle. While washing up last night, I happened to meet her. She asked me about Klein's interview, and I told her roughly what happened. Then she suggested I find the Tingen Housing Improvement Association for the Working Class." Benson noticed Klein's puzzled expression and shook his head in amusement. "They are targeted at the poor." "Well, a precise description is that they are a housing association for the lower strata of society. They build and renovate houses that basically have communal bathrooms. They only provide 3 choices: a single, double, or triple bedroom. Do you wish to continue living in such an environment? The Tingen City Housing Improvement Company share similar businesses as them, but they also provide choices for the lower middle class. To be honest, we are a little better than lower middle class, but we still quite worse off than true middle class families. It's not a matter of salary. It's just that we did not have the time to save up." Klein came to a realization as he put away the newspaper. Picking up his top hat, he stood up. "Then let's set off. I remember that the Tingen City Housing Improvement Company is on Daffodil Street," Benson said as he opened the door. "They are like the Tingen Housing Improvement Association for the Working Class, known as 5% Charities. Do you know why?" "I don't know." Klein raised his cane and walked to Melissa's side. The girl with black hair that reached down her back nodded. Benson headed out and said, "These kinds of housing improvement associations or companies were established as a result of backlund. They are funded in 3 ways. 1, by requesting donations from charitable foundations. 2, through funding proposals. They receive grants from the government's commission at a special rate of 4%. 3rd, through investments. By taking a portion of the rent received, they will give their investors 5% returns. That's why they are called 5% charities." The siblings went down the stairs and slowly walked toward a Daffodil Street. They decided to confirm a place before talking to their present landlord, Mr. Frankie. They did not want to be in a situation where they were forced to move when had no place to stay. "I heard from Selena that there are housing improvement companies that are purely run as charities," Melissa asked in thought. Benson chuckled. "There are, such as the Deweyville Trust, which Sir Deweyville donated money to establish. He builds apartments targeted for the working class. He also provides dedicated estate management personnel while only charging rather low rent. However, the criteria for applying is very strict." "It sounds like you aren't fond of the idea." Klein acutely sensed it as he asked with a smile. "No. I respect Sir Deweyville a lot, but I'm certain he does not know what true poverty is. Staying in his apartment is like a priest giving hope. It's not very pragmatic. For instance, tenants have to receive the main vaccines, and they have to take turns cleaning the bathroom. They are unable to sublease their apartments or use it for commercial activities. They aren't allowed to throw their rubbish wantonly, and children are prevented from playing in the corridors." "Goddess, does he wish to make everyone ladies and gentlemen?" Benson answered in his usual tone. Klein creased his brows in doubt. "Doesn't sound problematic. Those are all very reasonable criteria." "Yeah." Melissa nodded in agreement. Benson cocked his head and looked at them before chuckling. "Perhaps I have protected the both of you too well that you have not seen actual poverty. Do you think they would have the money for the main vaccines? The line for free charitable organization sets them back 3 months. Do you think their work is stable and not temporary? If they cannot sublet parts of their apartment to receive some extra income, are they to move out when they lose their jobs? Besides, many ladies mend clothes or make matchboxes at home to maintain their livelihood. Those are included as commercial activities. Are you going to chase them all out? Most of the poor use all their efforts to survive. Do you think they have the time to discipline their children and stop them from running along the corridors? Perhaps they can only be locked at home until they're old enough. then sending them to places that accept child labor when they are around 7 or 8 years old. Ben did not use many adjectives to describe the matter. It caused Klein to shudder a little. This was how people from low socioeconomic classes lived. Beside him, Melissa fell into silence. It took a long while before she said in an ethereal tone, "Jenny no longer wished for me to visit her after she moved to the lower street. Let's hope her father gets back on his feet after that injury and finds a stable job. However, I have seen too many alcoholics use alcohol to numb themselves." Benson laughed with a somber tone. Klein was at a loss for words. Melissa seemed to be the same. As such, the siblings walked silently down Daffodil Street and found Tingen City Housing Improvement Company. The person who served them was a middle-aged man with an amiable smile. He did not wear a formal attire or a hat, but instead wore a white shirt and black vest. "You can call me Scarter. Might I know what kind of house you have in mind?" When he caught a glance at Klein's silver-inlaid cane, his smile widened. Klein looked at Benson, who was better with words, and gestured for him to answer. Benson directly answered, "A terrace house." Scarter flipped through the files and documents in his hand before smiling. "There are currently 5 that haven't been rented out. To be honest, we are geared more to serving customers, laborers and their children who have housing difficulties where 6, 8, or even 10 or 12 people squeeze into a house. There aren't many terrace houses. There's one at 2 Daffodil Street, one in the North Borough, one in the East Borough. The weekly rent goes from 12 to 16 solely. You can take a look at the detailed introductions here." He handed over a document to Benson, Klein, and Melissa. After reading through it, the siblings exchanged looks and pointed to the same spot on the piece of paper simultaneously. "Let's take a look at 2 Daffodil Street first," said Benson. Klein and Melissa nodded in response. This place was a district they were familiar with. Chapter 30. Brand New Beginning. 2, 4, and 6. Daffodil Street were terrace buildings with multifaceted hipped roofs. Their exteriors were painted grayish-blue, and 3 chimneys stood erected. The place obviously did not have lawns, gardens, or porches. The entrances directly faced the street. Tingen City Housing Improvement Company's Scarter took out a bunch of keys and, while opening the door, introduced, "Our terrace houses do not have foyers, so you enter directly into the living room. There's an oriel window facing Daffodil Street, so there's pretty good lighting." Klein, Benson, and Melissa were greeted by a fabric sofa bathing in the golden rays of the sun, and an area more spacious than their previous 2-bedroom apartment. This living room can be used as a guest hall. To its right is the dining room, and on the left is a fireplace that will keep you warm in winter. Scarter pointed around with great familiarity. Klein looked around and confirmed that it was a crude, open-style concept. The dining room and the living room were not separated by any partitions, but they were also far from the oriel window, making those spots rather dim. There was a rectangular red wooden table surrounded by 6 hardwood chairs with soft cushions. The fireplace on the left wall looked exactly like the ones in foreign movies and TV series that Klein used to watch. Behind the dining area is the kitchen, but we do not provide any appliances. Opposite to the living room is a small guest room and a bathroom. Scarter walked around and described the remaining layout of the house. The bathroom was separated into 2 parts. The outer area was where one would wash their face and brush their teeth, while the inner area was the toilet. There was an accordion door that separated them. The guest room was described to be small, but it was as big as the room that Melissa currently stayed in. She was stunned at the sight. After looking around the first floor, Scarter brought the 3 siblings to the stairway next to the bathroom. "Down below is the underground cellar. It is quite stuffy downstairs, so you must remember to let some fresh air in first before entering." Benson nodded casually and followed Scarter to the 2nd floor. "On my left there's a bathroom. On the same side, there are an additional 2 bedrooms. It's the same layout on my right, but the washroom on this side is next to the balcony." As he spoke, Scarter opened the bathroom door and stood sideways so that he would not obstruct Klein, Benson, and Melissa from looking in. The bathroom had an extra bathtub. Like the other bathroom, there was an accordion door next to the toilet. Although it was a little dusty, it wasn't dirty, smelly, or cramped. Melissa looked in a daze, until Scarter walked to the bedroom next to it. Only then did she stop looking and follow the rest slowly. She took another few steps before looking back. Klein, who was experienced in life, was delighted and excited as well. Even though their landlord often supervised their cleaning up of the bathroom, it still was not clean enough. It was often nauseating, let alone the fact that they would easily encounter a line when they needed to relieve their urgencies. The other bathroom was similar. One of the 4 bedrooms was slightly bigger and was furnished with a bookcase. The rest were about the same size as each other and had a bed, table, and wardrobe. The balcony is very tiny, so you won't be able to dry too many clothes in the sun at a time. Scarter stood at the end of the corridor and pointed to a spot with a door and lock. There is a complete underground drainage, gas piping, meter, and other facilities. It is very suitable for you gentlemen and a lady like yourselves. It only requires 13 solely of rent and 5 pence for use of the furniture weekly. In addition, there is a deposit that amounts to 4 weeks of rent. Without waiting for Benson to say a word, Klein looked around and asked curiously, "Roughly how much would it cost to buy the house?" As a transmigrator from the foodaholic empire, the desire to buy property still existed within him. Upon hearing that question, Benson and Melissa were shocked. They looked at Klein as though they were seeing a monster. Scarter replied calmly and firmly, "Buy? No. We do not sell property, we only provide rental properties. I'm just trying to have a general sense of the prices," Klein explained awkwardly. Scarter hesitated for a few seconds before saying, "Last month, the owner of 11 Daffodil Street sold a limited-period land deed with a similar property sitting atop the land. £300 for 15 years. It is much cheaper than renting directly, but not everyone can fork out such a large sum of money. If one would like to buy it over completely, the owner's posted price £850. £850? Klein quickly made the mental calculations. My weekly pay is £3, Benson Ian's £1, and 10 solely. Rent is 13 solely, and if we eat well every day, we would spend nearly £2 a week. On top of that, there are expenses such as clothes, transportation, social expenditures, so on and so forth. We can only save less than 20 solely a week. 1 year adds up to about £35. £850 would require more than 20 years. Even if we bought the land for a limited period of time for £300, it would take us at least 8 or 9 years. That doesn't include getting married, living independently, raising children, traveling, and so on. In a world without individual housing loans, most people are likely to opt for rental." Realizing this, he stepped back and stole a glance at Benson. He beckoned him to talk to Scarter about the rent. As for Melissa's intentions, they were obvious from her bright eyes. At that moment, Klein suddenly thought of letting Benson loose. Benson tapped his plain cane and looked around before he said, "We should take a look at other houses. The dining area's lighting isn't good, and the balcony is very small. Look, only that bedroom has a fireplace, and the furniture is too old. If we move in, we have to at least change half of these." He pointed out faults in a hurried tone, spending 10 minutes to persuade Scarter to lower the rent to 12 solely and the furniture usage fee to 3 pence, while rounding up the deposit to £2. Without further ado, the siblings returned with Scarter to the Tingen City Housing Improvement Company and signed 2 copies of the contract. They then headed over to the notary office of Tingen City to notarize the contract. After paying the deposit and first week's rent, Klein and Benson's remaining money added up to £9, 2 solely, and 8 pence. Standing before the door of 2nd Daffodil Street, they each held a bunch of copper keys. They were momentarily unable to look away, their emotions churning within them. It feels like a dream. After a while, Melissa lifted her head to look at the future Moretti residence, and she spoke with a low yet unsteady voice. Benson let out a breath and smiled. Then don't wake up. Klein wasn't as emotional as they were. He nodded and said, "We need to change the locks of the main door and balcony door as soon as possible. There's no hurry. The reputation of Tingen City Housing Improvement Company is very good. The rest of the money is for your formal suit. However, before that, we need to pay Mr. Frankie a visit." Benson pointed in the direction of the apartment. The siblings made do with rye bread at home before heading for a terrace apartment on Iron Cross Street. When they knocked on their landlord's door, Mr. Frankie declared imposingly, while his short frame perched on a sofa, "You know my rules. No one is allowed to be behind their rent." Benson leaned forward and smiled. "Mr. Frankie, we are here to give up our lease." That's straightforward. Would negotiating this way work? Standing beside Benson, Klein was shocked when he heard him. On the way here, Benson had said that his bottom line was a compensation of 12 solely. "Give up your lease? No! We have a contract, and there's still half a year left." Frankie glared at Benson as he flailed his arms. Benson looked at him seriously and waited for a moment before saying calmly, "Mr. Frankie, you should understand that you could have made much more money." "Make much more?" Frankie asked with interest, touching his skinny face. Benson sat up straight and explained with a smile. "The 2-bedroom unit was rented to the 3 of us for 5 solely and 6 pence. But if you were to rent it to a family of 5 or 6 people, with 2 or 3 of them working and getting paid, I think they would be willing to pay more to stay there instead of staying at Lower Street where it's ridden with crime. I think 5 solely 10 pence or 6 solely would be a reasonable price." Frankie's eyes brightened up, and his throat moved as Benson continued to say, "Besides, you are certainly aware that rental prices have been increasing in recent years. The longer we stay, the greater a loss you incur. But I need time to look for a new tenant." Mr. Frankie, who had inherited the apartment building, obviously liked the idea. "I believe you can find one very quickly since you have the ability and resources to do so. Maybe 2 days, maybe 3 days. We will pay for the losses you incur during this time. How about the deposit of 3 solely that we have paid? It is very reasonable." Benson immediately decided for Frankie. Frankie nodded in satisfaction. "Benson, you are such a conscientious and honest young man. All right then, let's sign the termination of contract." Klein was dumbfounded watching this happen. He completely understood how easy it was to convince Mr. Frankie. That's way too easy. With the problem of the previous contract resolved, the 3 siblings first helped Klein buy his formal wear and then got busy with moving house. They didn't have anything heavy or bulky, as bulkier items belonged to the landlord. Thus Benson and Melissa rejected Klein's idea of hiring a carriage and instead carried their things themselves. They went back and forth between Daffodil Street and Iron Cross Street. The hot sun outside the window set in the west, and golden rays shone through the oriel window, scattering across the desk's surface. Klein looked at the rack that had books and notebooks arranged neatly before putting an ink bottle and a fountain pen on the table, which he had wiped cleaned earlier. It's finally over. He let out a breath of relief and heard his stomach growl. He loosened his rolled-up sleeves as he walked towards the door. He had a bed that belonged to him. The bedsheet and blanket were white, old, but clean. Klein twisted the doorknob and walked out of his bedroom. Just as he was preparing to say something, he saw both doors on the opposite side open simultaneously as Benson and Melissa came into his view. Looking at the dust and dirt marks on their faces, Klein and Benson suddenly burst out into laughter, sounding abnormally cheerful. Melissa bit her lips lightly, but the laughter was contagious. She eventually let out a soft laugh. The next morning, Klein stood before a full-length mirror with no cracks, seriously smoothing out his collar and sleeves of his shirt. The outfit included a white shirt, black tuxedo, silk top hat, black vest, a set of trousers, boots, and a bow tie. He felt the pinch of paying £8 in total. However, the effect was great. Klein felt that his reflection in the mirror exhibited greater scholarly qualities and made him look more handsome. Click. He closed his pocket watch and put it into his inner pocket. He then took his cane and hid his revolver. He took the tracked public carriage and arrived at Zootaland Street. The moment he entered the Blackthorn Security Company, he realized that he was so used to his previous lifestyle that he had forgotten to give Melissa extra money but allowed her to walk to school instead. Shaking his head, he took note of it before stepping into Blackthorn Security Company. He saw the brown-haired girl, Roseanne, making coffee. A rich aroma permeated throughout the office. "Good morning, Klein. The weather is great today," Roseanne greeted him with a smile. "To be frank, I have always been curious. In such weather, don't you men feel hot wearing those formal suits? I know for a fact that Tingen's summer isn't as hot as the South, but it is still summer." "It's the price of style," Klein replied humorously. "Good morning, Miss Roseanne. Where's the captain?" "Same old place." Roseanne pointed inside. Klein nodded. He went through the partition and knocked on Dunn Smith's office door. "Come in." Dunn's voice was deep and gentle as usual. When he saw Klein, who looked quite different in a set of nice formal wear, he nodded and his gray eyes smiled. "Have you decided?" he asked. Klein took a deep breath and answered seriously, "Yes, I have made a decision." Dunn slowly sat up straight. His expression became solemn, but the deep recesses of his gray eyes remained the same. "Tell me your answer." Klein replied without hesitation. "Sear?" Chapter 31. Potion. Dunn Smith stared at Klein with his gray eyes for a full minute without a word. Klein did not cower under the pressure of the silence and his gaze. He continued locking his eyes with Dunn. "You must understand that once you consume the potion, there will be no room for regret." Finally, Dunn spoke again in a deep, emotionless voice. Klein grinned and said, "I know, but I respect the voice in me. First, Sleepless does not meet my requirements." It was the same for Spectator, which he heard from the Tarot Club based on description. He was unsure when he would come into contact with other Beyonder pathways. A slow remedy could not work for an urgent situation. Therefore, there was no need for him to wait. By the same logic, Corpse Collector was eliminated as well, leaving the two choices, Mystery Prior and Sear. Under the premise that potions of the same sequence were equally dangerous, and him unable to obtain more information, as well as the fact that both Mystery Prior and Sear met his requirements, then regardless of whether Emperor Roselle was making a passing remark, or if he really regretted not choosing Apprentice, Marauder, and Sear, it was enough to tip the balance in his heart. Furthermore, he could tell from the diary that as long as he figured out the true essence of digestion and acting, he would be able to avoid the negative effects the potion would bring to a significant extent. As for the murmurings and illusory enticements that could drive people to corruption and madness, he had already encountered that, even without being a Beyonder. "All right." Dunn stood up and picked up his half-top hat. As he put it on, he said, "Follow me down." Klein nodded and gave a gentleman's bow in gratitude. Tap, tap, tap. Both of them ventured down, their footsteps echoing through the silent and vast stairwell and passageway. Klein suddenly felt gripped by anxiety as he tried to find a topic of conversation. "Captain, you mentioned that taking the potion would not directly give me the corresponding knowledge on mysticism, that I'll only have the qualifications to learn it. Then, where does the basic knowledge of mysticism come from? Did our predecessors risk their life for it or obtain it via other means?" Every time he went underground, he would find the air especially fresh. Clearly, the ventilation was excellent. However, the occasional gust of wind made one shiver. Dunn glanced at him, the darkness in his gray eyes appearing abnormally deep. He answered calmly, "One of them is, as you said, experimentation, summarization, and enhancement. Second, being bestowed by the gods. Third, hate. The dangerous murmurs that others can't hear do not only growl and roar senselessly. At times, they will describe some matters regarding mysticism. But according to what I know, people who truly listen to the murmurs on a long-term basis have gone mad without exception, or they would fall to corruption and become monsters. Of course, we must thank them. The notebooks they've left behind are precious treasures in the field of mysticism. Human lab rats? The underground passage's cold humidity made Klein shudder suddenly. Then, would my luck enhancement ritual, which turned into social network magic, eventually lead to similar effects due to the crazy and horrible murmurs? At the intersection, Dunn did not proceed toward Chanis Gate, nor did he turn to the weapons, materials, and archives. Instead, he took Klein to the left and approached St. Selena Cathedral. Midway, he stopped. It was unclear what he touched to open a secret door. "This is our Nighthawk team's Alchemy Room. I will get old Neil to retrieve the Sear potion formula and the corresponding materials from inside Chanis Gate." "Ha! You have pretty good luck. The goddess has blessed you with her favor. We should still have the materials needed for 2 Sear potions. If not, you would have to wait a long while." Dunn pointed at the room behind the door. "Wait in here. Later, watch old Neil concoct the potion. It's the most basic part of mysticism studies." "Oh, do not randomly touch things in there. They are either very dangerous, expensive, or both." With that said, Dunn added like before, "Oh, right. I forgot something again. Your becoming a Beyonder is a result of you having to face danger and the need to find the notebook. The meritorious deed was only a part of it. Therefore, you will not be a member of our team for the time being. You will still be a civilian staff member with a corresponding salary. You will still do what I instructed you to do previously. One additional thing is to learn more about mysticism with old Neil. You can arrange the time with him. All right?" Other than feeling a little disgruntled by the lack of a pay rise, Klein was in full agreement with the rest. According to Dunn, there was still the process of learning and grasping one's newfound powers after consuming the potion. If he were to become a formal member immediately and participate in paranormal missions, his death was certain. Dunn turned around and walked 2 steps towards the intersection when he suddenly turned back. "Another thing." I knew it. Klein was already used to the style of his captain. "We got something out of the Secret Order's actions," said Dunn with his usual expression. "It's unlikely they will provoke you in the near future, but don't be careless. It has to do with them being temporarily unable to confirm whether the Antigonus family's notebook is important to them. From what we discovered, they have preserved some of the ancient customs, and we can confirm that they are related to the Solomon Empire and the corrupted nobles of that period." "Got it. Thanks, Captain," said Klein as he exhaled. This was also one of the reasons why he did not wish to wait, grasping the chance of becoming a Beyonder in such a hurry. As he watched Dunn leave and confirmed that he would not turn his head to say more, Klein slowly walked into the Alchemy Room. The room had long tables. There were test tubes, pipettes, scales, and crucibles. It resembled a chemistry laboratory from his previous life. It was just more Spartan and ancient. Other than that, there was a huge cauldron, a dark wood ladle, a translucent crystal ball, and other items. The dark sacred emblem and other strange emblems were visible everywhere. They gave the room a tint of mystery. Klein looked around with interest, but he was not stupid enough to touch the things. After a while, he heard footsteps. Old Neil carried a tiny silver chest with complicated patterns. He was still wearing his unique classic black robe that seemed anachronistic, matched with a felt hat with a rounded edge of the same color. "Lad, I never expected you to choose Sear." Old Neil put down the chest and used his somewhat turbid red eyes size up Klein. "Your personality is just like mine when I was young. You just don't want to follow the masses. Not bad. Light these few gas lamps and close the door. All right?" Klein tried hard not to tremble as he lit each gas lamp in the Alchemy Room. He made dim light rule over the place once again. Tack, tack, tack. The secret door was closed. He turned back to see the white-haired and deep-wrinkled old Neil using a bunch of strange tied tree branches to scrub all the black cauldron. The concoction of a sequence potion is extremely simple, at least for sequence 7 and below. There's no need for a special flame or any additional ritual, much less an incantation. There's no need for one to participate in it spiritually. All one needs to do is go according to the formula's steps, add the precise amounts, and mix it. That will be all. Old Neil's wrinkles seemed to bloom from his smile. For real? Klein questioned in surprise. This sounds as simple as my luck enhancement ritual. Man, it's quite frightening when you come to think of it. Perhaps it's a gift of the gods. Praise the lady. Old Neil drew a haphazard circle over his chest. Following that, he opened the silver chest and pulled out goatskin parchment that exuded antiquity. The yellowish-brown goatskin unfurled inch by inch, revealing words on it. Klein looked from a distance and realized it was in Hermes, a language he was very familiar with. It was written in ink that resembled blood, seeming to still having its fluidity intact. But other than that, it did not seem extraordinary in any way. Sear, 100 milliliters of pure water, 13 drops of night vanilla liquids, 7 gold mint leaves. Klein silently recited the formula's content, but the rest of it was blocked by Old Neil's wrist, preventing him from reading it. Pure water is water that is repeatedly distilled. Thankfully, I made some previously, so there's no need to waste time on it. While Old Neil gave the introduction, he took a large, sealed glass bottle from the table with great familiarity. He took off the stopper and poured about 100 milliliters of pure water into the cauldron without much thought. Klein did not dare ask, afraid he would affect Old Neil's concoction. After all, he was the one drinking the potion. 13 drops of night vanilla juices. This can be extracted and stored as an essential oil ahead of time. Old Neil took out a tiny brown bottle from the silver chest and with a pipette and dripped 13 drops into the cauldron in a relaxed manner. A faint but easing fragrance emanated, making Klein feel an abnormal sense of peace. 7 gold mint leaves. Old Neil picked up a silver-patterned can and removed its lid. With his bare hands, he picked up a few leaves and scattered it into the cauldron. He caught a whiff of a fresh and stimulating scent. 4, 5, 6, 7. Perfect. Old Neil chuckled and looked at the potion formula on the goatskin. 3 drops of poison hemlock. This isn't something you should drink randomly. It can cause your entire body to numb to the point of death. In ancient times, it proved to be the best option for committing suicide. It's not like I'm silly, Klein lampooned. Old Neil changed pipettes and dripped the poison hemlock into the cauldron. The mixture caused a strange smell that freshened one's mind. 9 grams of dragon blood grass powder. Old Neil took his time to reach his hand into the silver chest and pulled out a transparent test tube. There was some deep black powder inside. He used a beaker and a scale to measure 9 grams of powder and poured it into the cauldron. He then stirred the mixture twice with the dark wood ladle. The laid-back process to making the concoction made Klein a little worried. In fact, the materials from before were just supplemental. The exact amount doesn't really affect the final outcome. Should I put a little bit more? Old Neil made a joke. The last 2 is what's crucial. The amount can be slightly lowered, but it cannot be too far from the requirement, or your enhancement can fail. Oh, the quantity cannot be any more, even just by a bit. If so, you will have to be treated for mental problems. It's not impossible to die immediately. Klein immediately tensed up as he saw Old Neil pull out a black glass bottle from the silver chest. Lavos squid's blood, 10 milliliters. This kind of squid is considered an extraordinary biological species. It is clearly mutated. It is covered in mystery. Its blood will rapidly break down under sunlight and lose its unique qualities. It has to be stored in opaque material. Old Neil's tone no longer sounded relaxed. He quickly and carefully retrieved 10 milliliters of blood with a test tube. The blood was blue like the sky. From time to time, it produced illusory bubbles, as though it was connected to the spiritual world. After pouring the blood inside the test tube, the remaining drops are ignored as a form of precaution, whispered Old Neil. The moment the blue blood entered the cauldron and made contact with the liquid from before, it produced bubbling sounds. The surrounding light was dyed with a light blue tinge, making Klein feel a strange sense of distance, but also familiarity. It felt like the feeling of being in a mother's womb. It elevated a human's soul. The final item, stellar aqua crystal, 50 grams. Old Neil's voice sounded in Klein's ears, jolting him awake as he looked at the table. In the old gentleman's hand was a piece of extremely pure crystal. Furthermore, the crystal appeared gelatinous, as though it was jelly from Earth. It lacked hardness. Under the blue light's illumination, it reflected bits of light, as it seemed to contain a resplendent void of stars within. This is excellent material for the creation of divination crystals, just a little less in consideration of any mistakes. As old Neil measured, he used a tiny patterned silver blade to extract the crystal. Pure water, night vanilla, gold mint leaves, poison hemlock juice, dragon blood grass, lavos squid blood, and stellar aqua crystal make up a sear. At that moment, Klein could not help but recall the formula. With everything done, old Neil poured in a few blocks of stellar aqua crystal into the cauldron. Sizzle. Illusory fog instantly spewed forth, turning the alchemy room into a blur. Klein seemed to see a vast array of stars amid the fog and felt like he was being observed by an invisible existence. A few seconds later, the fog dissipated. Old Neil used the dark wood ladle and scooped out some sticky dark blue liquid. It had strange characteristics, gooey and inseparable. Not one bit was left in the black cauldron. The dark blue liquid was poured into an opaque cup before old Neil pointed at it. It's done. Your Sear potion. Chapter 32. Spirit Vision. Klein looked at dark blue gelatinous liquid, finding it hard to describe it as either a block or cup of liquid. He swallowed his saliva and said in great difficulty, "Am I to drink it just like that? Is there no need for any other preparations, like a ritual, an incantation, or a prayer?" Old Neil acknowledged tersely before saying, "Preparation? There is. Get a cup of Intis Armir grape wine, suck on a desi cigar, then whistle a relaxing tune. And dance a upbeat court dance. You can do a tap dance if you prefer that. Finally, play a round of Gwent cards." When he saw Klein's expression turn dumbfounded, old Neil laughed and summarized what he had just said. "If you feel nervous, you are quite humorous, aren't you?" The corners of Klein's mouth twitched as he resisted the urge to draw his gun. He put his cane down and extended his right hand. As though he held something heavy, he raised the opaque cup. The smell of the potion was faint and seemingly ethereal. "Lad, do not hesitate. The more you hesitate, the more nervous and afraid you will be. That will only affect the absorption that follows," said old Neil, with his back facing Klein. It was as though he had said it casually. It was unknown when he arrived by the nearby water basin. He turned on the tap and washed his hands. Klein nodded silently and took a deep breath. Just like he was back when he was a child, he pinched his nose and drank it like medicine. He moved the opaque cup to his mouth and tipped his head, drinking it down with a gulp. A cool and smooth feeling quickly filled his oral cavity. It then flowed through his gullet and into his stomach. The sticky dark blue liquid seemed to grow out thin and long tentacles, bringing stimulation and coldness to every cell in Klein's body. He could not help but convulse, as his vision rapidly went into a blur. All colors seemed to saturate. The reds were redder, the blues were bluer, and the blacks were blacker. The rich colors blended like an impressionist painting. Klein had seen such a scene before. It was back when he was questioned by the spirit medium, daily. At that moment, his vision became a blur, and although his mind felt light, it was clear. He felt like a castaway floating in the sea. Slowly, his surroundings turned discernible. All the colors returned to their original, as a grayish and blurry fog emanated. Around him were bodies he found difficult to describe. There were transparent objects that did not seem to exist. Deep down, There were clean, light clusters of different colors. The light seemed to possess life or contain immense knowledge. This is a little similar to what I saw during the luck enhancement ritual. As Klein instinctively looked down, he realized that he was still standing in his original spot, body convulsing. Suddenly he came to a realization, causing his consciousness to sink abruptly and fuse with him. Boom! The fog quickly dissipated as the colors restored to normal. The bright, clear halo and the inexistent objects instantly vanished. The scene in the Alchemy Room returned to normal, but Klein felt his head swell. He felt like it was being yanked apart. Whatever he saw had countless afterimages. His ears were overwhelmed by an ethereal murmur. Hornasis, Phlegrea, Hornasis, Phlegrea, Hornasis, Phlegrea. Klein felt a stabbing pain at his forehead as he quickly had thoughts of causing destruction to vent the discomfort in him. He frowned and hurriedly shook his head. Is your vision abnormal? Are you also hearing things you did not use to hear? Said old Neil at his side with a concealed smile. Yes, Mr. Neil. What should I do? Klein tolerated the intense mania and asked. Old Neil chuckled. This is the resulting seepage of the potion's energy. You lack the means to control it. All right, do as I say. Think of an object in your mind. Something common. Make it simple and easy. Klein quickly focused as he envisaged his own halved top hat woven from black silk. He recalled the feeling when he touched it and its exact shape. Place all your focus on it. Keep repeating that while creating the outlines. Does it feel a little better? Old Neil's voice penetrated into his mind like a serene song. Klein turned his focus bit by bit to the imagined top hat. He felt the murmurs subside into a whisper before they vanished. The afterimages he saw also stacked upon one another and no longer appeared a blur. Much better, said Klein, after calming his mind of chaotic emotions and having exhaled. He looked down at his body and discovered that nothing abnormal had happened. He moved his limbs, and with half anticipation and half doubt, asking, I succeeded? I'm now considered a seer? Old Neil pulled out a mirror-like mercury plate and shoved it in front of him. Look at your eyes. Klein focused his gaze and saw that he was wearing a black top hat. His outline stood out, and his facial features looked normal. Apart from having his face covered in sweat, he did not seem different in any way. He followed old Neil's instruction and carefully looked at his eyes. Only then did he discover that his brown eyes had deepened quite significantly. It was so much deepened that it was like the night, one in complete darkness. It felt so deep that it could absorb the souls of others. Normally, dark brown pupils are easily recognized as black. Without looking very carefully, even Klein himself would not have noticed. This is a physical manifestation of the potion's powers. When you learn cogitation and how to converge your power, your eyes will return to normal. Old Neil smiled as he reached out his right hand. Congratulations, our new Beyonder, our Sear. Thank you. Klein reached out his hand and shook it. Mr. Neil, when can I learn how to cogitate? You can learn it now. The initial steps of cogitation is relatively simple. It's even more so for Beyonders, said old Neil with a smile. Just now, producing an object in your mind to divert your attention and turning the energy seepage in words is actually the first step to cogitation. Try doing it again. Klein closed his eyes and once again his mind depicted the halved top hat. His concentration seemed to be more easily focused than before. Soon, random thoughts that surfaced would quickly vanish, leaving the hat's outline. Let your brain go somewhat blank. Exchange the object you imagined. Use something that does not exist in this world, an object you imagine completely out of thin air. You have to follow this rule. Only by doing so can you enter cogitation. Only then can you exceed the concept of I. The limitless I will become one with the universe, giving you the ability to see and understand the truth. You will obtain knowledge only you yourself can understand. In the domain of mysticism studies, it's called a mystic experience, said old Neil, using a pacifying tone. You just need to listen to the descriptions that I'll get to later. What's most important is to enter cogitation, something that doesn't exist in this world. Imagine something completely out of thin air. Would things from Earth count? Klein attempted using an earthy green intercontinental missile he saw on television. He replaced the halved top hat with this long and thick missile. However, regardless of how he outlined it or imagined it, he ultimately only ended up focusing his attention. It doesn't seem like it will work. Klein had no choice but to let his imagination run wild. He outlined a sphere of light and then many similar objects, gathering them together. The spheres of light stacked upon one another. It felt like an object of fantasy. Klein's thoughts gradually turned ethereal and afloat. His body and mind calmed down. The objects that did not seem to exist, the fog with the bright clusters of light, and the complex colors appeared once again. They floated in the sky in close reach. He extended his spirituality inch by inch as he looked down at them quietly. He sensed it and took it in. Very good. As expected of a seer, you entered cogitation very smoothly. You are just slightly worse than me back then. Slightly, said old Neil with a chuckle. In that case, I'll begin teaching you the most common, easiest to grasp, and most useful ability in the future in mysticism. Spirit vision. He switched off the gas lamps one after another, but opened the door to the Alchemy Room. It made the spot where Klein was dark, but not to the point of failing to make out silhouettes of objects. All right, in your present state, raise your hands and place them in front of your eyes. Your index fingers need to face each other, but they are not to touch. Open your eyes and keep them open until you are accustomed to the darkness. Klein completed each step according to old Neil's description. He saw the silhouettes of his fingers and the surrounding objects. Actually, you should be lying down to let your body be entirely relaxed. But since the effect of your cogitation is not bad, let's continue. Old Neil laughed. Focus your gaze on a spot behind your hands. It has to be behind. Then, slowly move your fingers and maintain the same pose without touching them. Also, do not pull them out of your sight. Klein calmly listened to it and cast his gaze at an empty spot behind his palms. He then slowly moved his index fingers within his vision. Once, twice, thrice. Suddenly, Klein saw a fiery red color in between his fingers. He let out a sound. You see color? That's right. That's the initial step to spirit vision. The color you see is your aura, said old Neil with a chuckle. No rush. Do it a few more times. After stabilizing it, look elsewhere. I'll also take this opportunity to explain to you the different meanings of the different colors. All right. Klein moved his fingers back and forth while having his vision trained on the fiery red. Old Neil thought for a moment before saying, to put it simply, the mainstream way of mysticism is to split non-physical parts of a human into 4 levels. At its core is the spirit body, which is also everyone's basic spirituality. There is a school of thought that believes all biological creatures have spirituality and have a spirit body. I'm not sure about anything else, but to mystery priors, the goal of cogitation and the method to increase our strength is directed toward the spirit body. Outside the spirit body is the astral projection. It is the means for the spirit body to communicate with the spirit world and with stellar space. It's considered an external manifestation of the spirit body. Besides, it will be directly related to your personal ambition and your prevailing emotions. The scenes you see after consuming the potion are scenes your astral projection sees when it wanders through the spirit world. That world does not obey the laws of the physical world. It involves exceeding the concept of I, the limitless I, and the universe's I. The past, present, and future might be stacked upon one another, and that is the source of divination. In the spirit world, what you see is just an imagery, a symbol. You have to interpret it to understand its actual meaning. Divination and many magic spells are cast through the astral projection. Do not mistake its relationship and differences with a spirit body. One is just a body, and the other is for form. Klein continued looking at the aura in between his fingertips and made the simple conclusion. Further out will be the body of heart and mind. From this point forth, it will combine with the physical body. It involves your brain and is an overall manifestation of your inferential abilities, your analytical abilities, your observational abilities, and identification abilities. Some potions will mainly raise this. Quite a number of magic spells target it as well. Old Neil explained in relatively great detail. The outermost layer is the ether body. It is a manifestation of your vital energies in physical form. The aura color you see is an external phenomenon of your ether body. In other words, apart from the spiritual bodies, ghosts, and specters you can see directly with spirit vision, it might also include certain existences that should not be seen. You can also see the ether bodies of others, or their auras. From their thickness, brightness, and color, you can determine their health and emotional state. When your spirit vision improves and you grasp more mysticism knowledge, you will be able to discover even more details. You can even determine the lifespan of others. By the way, the emotional state I mentioned would also manifest itself because of your astral projection. When you go higher in sequence, your spirit vision will reach a relatively high stage. You can even be able to see someone else's astral projection. That way, you will learn even more things. This is a level only seers and mystery priors can attain. Some fellows even claim that the strongest form of spirit vision allows one to see anything in any place, including the past and future. However, I'm skeptical about it. It sounds quite powerful. Klein was almost turning eager. Old Neil coughed and continued. Let's return body and the colors of the auras. Your limbs and parts that are required in motion will appear red. Your head and brain surface will appear as purple. Spots that excrete waste will appear orange. The digestion system will appear as yellow. The heart and other regulatory systems will appear green. Your throat and other parts of the nervous system will appear blue. An entirely balanced body will make a body be cloaked in white. That is a symbol of health. Once it turns dark or the thickness thins, the color will change. That indicates that the corresponding spot has turned problematic. It means it's in a state of exhaustion or illness. In addition, the inner layer of the astral projection represents prevailing emotions. Red means passion and excitement. Orange means warmth and satisfaction. Yellow means happiness and extroversion. Green means calm and peace. Blue means coldness and stillness that one is in thought. White means brightness and eagerness to improve. Dark colors mean worry, sorrow, and silence. Purple means that spirituality is taking control of the lead, coldness, and estrangement. Klein silently memorized the information and stabilized his initial spirit vision. Good. You can look at other objects. Old Neil did not speak further as he nodded. Klein slowly turned his head and looked at Old Neil. Indeed, he saw different colors in different parts of his body. The aura was both thick and thin at different spots. The purple color at his head was brightest, and his limbs' redness was relatively dark. The overall whiteness to his body was somewhat faded as well. Indeed, he's getting on in age. Klein made a silent comment to himself. Only with what he saw did he feel that he had become a beyonder. I am now a beyonder. He shifted his gaze and carefully sized up Old Neil when suddenly he saw a translucent pair of cold and ruthless eyes without any brows in the void behind him. This nearly illusory eyes were staring at Old Neil intently, as well as him. This... Klein shuddered as he gasped and said, "You have a pair of eyes behind you." Old Neil was taken aback before he forced a smile. Ignore them. Chapter 33. Switch. The moment Old Neil finished his sentence, the illusory pair of eyes that lurked in the darkness behind him vanished. Even in his spirit vision state, Klein was no longer able to identify traces of its existence. "This is a characteristic of ritualistic magic," explained old Neil with a chuckle. "Fascinating. Is spirit vision an enhanced version of Yin-Yang Eyes?" Klein felt like a child who had received a new toy. In excitement, he turned his gaze way and began observing every corner of the room. He wanted to see the differences of the Alchemy Room with and without the spirit vision. The outlines of the objects in the dark, such as the tables, test tubes, scales, cups, and cupboards, did not look different from how it looked like without spirit vision. They did not emit any lights or colors. Objects without lives do not have any spirituality? Klein mumbled to himself as he swept his gaze toward the silver chest. Suddenly, he saw a vibrancy of colors. The colors were as blue as the sky, as resplendent as the stars, or as crimson red as burning flames. Materials from extraordinary beings still have some life in them, and, are still active, even if the source is already dead. Klein deliberated on his words as he sought old Neil's help. A precise description is that they have remnant spiritualities. It is one of the crucial points of a successful potion concoction. It is also one of the reasons why a Beyonder will lose control. Dunn should have already informed you, explained old Neil frankly. He suddenly laughed, having recalled something. I remember that the formula of Corpse Collector requires a desiccated, mature, black-spotted frog. To consume that potion requires a lot of courage. Klein imagined a little and found it disgusting. He did not echo old Neil's words and turned his gaze to a dark area. However, there were no spiritual bodies or ghosts that he looked forward to seeing. Isn't it said that the world of spirits is everywhere? He asked out of curiosity. Old Neil chuckled tersely before saying, Punk, repeat after me. This is the headquarters of a Nighthawk squad. This is the ground beneath the church of the Evernight Goddess. There are many Beyonders in here. Do you think we will allow spirits and souls to wander around in here? Furthermore, the spiritual world and spirit are two different concepts. Klein felt a little embarrassed as he turned his head, pretending to look at the faint light from the gas lamps at the entrance. I get it. While speaking, the area between his brows began to spasm. What's happening? Just as Klein turned around to ask, he suddenly saw a figure standing quietly by the door at the periphery of the light. It appeared human, though its aura's colors and the darkness blended perfectly, making it impossible to discern. Hiss! Klein felt a painful spasm at his glabella 1. His vision turned chaotic as he focused his attention again, but there was no formless figure. Strange. He turned around and asked, Mr. Neil, the spot in between my brows is a little painful from spasms. Ha ha, this is very common. You are a new Beyonder. Spirit vision places a great burden on your spirit body. Furthermore, it drains you constantly. Physical effects can be glabella spasms, headaches, oversensitivity, and minor bouts of hallucinations. And while viewing things with spirit vision, it's very easy to feel uncomfortable as a result of the unfamiliar surroundings. It's also very easy to have your emotions affected by others. These are things that require you to pay attention. You can become accustomed to and eliminate them with repeated practice. In addition, use it sparingly and end it in a timely fashion, answered old Neil with a smile. Why does it feel like you are delighted by this? Klein hurriedly asked for advice. Then, how do I exit from the state of having spirit vision? He had planned on mentioning the invisible figure he had seen, though when he heard of the minor bouts of hallucination among the symptoms, he struck that thought away. From the glabella spasm and headache, he could completely guess old Neil's answer. Like before, think of an item to divert your attention. It will bring you out of cogitation. Close your eyes and control your spirituality and repeatedly tell it to end. When you open your eyes again, you will discover that your spirit vision has ended. Old Neil described leisurely, and when he was done, added, Of course, that is the most trivial and clumsy method. We can repeatedly hint to ourselves in cogitation from practice to affect our spirituality. That way, you will have a simple switch. For instance, tapping at your glabella twice, lightly, would allow you easily activate spirit vision. Another 2 taps will simply end it. As for how you set it up, it depends on your habits and preferences. Got it? Klein thought for a moment and planned to imitate old Neil to use tapping his glabella twice as a switch for his spirit vision. Tapping once was easily mistaken as an instinctive knock to his head, and tapping thrice could be a waste of valuable time in dangerous situations. As for actions like snapping fingers, they were too attention-drawing. He eased his focus and imagined the stacked spheres of light and re-entered a state of cogitation. Under old Neil's guidance, after repeated hints and practice, he finally set up his switch. He clenched his fist slightly and used his index finger's joint to tap at his glabella twice. Immediately, there were glowing auras of differing thickness and colors appearing before his eyes. After another 2 taps, everything returned to normal. "I've finally grasped it," he sighed with delight. Only then did he realize how exhausted he was, feeling like he could fall asleep at any time. His mind hurt, as though he had stayed up for 3 nights. Old Neil said with a chuckle, "We are not sleepless. Every practice and every time spirit vision is used excessively, you will need some sleep. You can now go back and have a good rest. In the afternoon, go to Iron Cross Street, where Welch's place is, and walk around. Try your best to find clues about the Antigonus family's notebook as soon as possible. Tomorrow, I'll continue teaching you about mysticism. Of course, do not forget to read the historical documents." All right. Klein was in full agreement with old Neil's arrangements. He picked up his cane and left the Alchemy Room. He watched the door close as old Neil returned to the armory. Klein massaged his glabella and temples, and with the help of his cane, sauntered up the stairwell. At that moment, Dunn Smith came from behind him with the corners of his lips hooked. With a deep gaze, he said, "I heard from old Neil that you are a very suitable candidate. Even without cogitation, you were able to use spirit vision." "Perhaps it's a unique trait of being a seer," replied Klein humbly. He guessed that Dunn had been watching the armory for old Neil. Dunn slowed down and went ahead of Klein a little. After a few seconds of silence, he turned around and said, "You have to remember that curiosity killed the cat. It can also kill beyonders. Do not attempt to probe the murmurings you should not be listening or see existences you should not see." All right. Klein knew this was another reminder of how beyonders lost control. After entering Blackthorn Security Company, he greeted Roseanne, who obviously did not know that he had become a beyonder. He slowly walked out the door and reached the streets, where he took a trackless carriage to Daffodil Street. He nearly fell asleep on his return journey. It was still in the morning, and the temperature was about 26 degrees Celsius. Klein pulled out a copper key from his waistband and opened the door to his home. There were still many items missing from his home. The living room and dining hall were still empty. Benson and Melissa had work or school, so they had both left early in the morning. Klein didn't have the capacity to bother with anything else. He closed the door and briskly went to the second floor and entered the bookshelf-equipped bedroom that belonged to him. After taking off his tuxedo and hanging it on a clothing rack, he eagerly plunged into bed. The moment his head hit the pillow, he fell asleep. Klein was awoken by bright sunlight. He turned his head and slowly opened his eyes to discover the burning sun outside. What time is it? Did I miss the tarot club in the afternoon? He struggled to get up and walked to the clothing rack to take out his pocket watch from the pocket of the tuxedo's inner lining. Not only had he forgotten about the matter, he had forgotten to close the door to his bedroom and pulled the curtains to the oriel window. Pa! Klein pulled out the pocket watch and immediately felt relieved when he opened it. It was only slightly past noon. There was still a lot of time until the scheduled gathering at 3 in the afternoon. It was Monday, the day he would have a gathering with the hanged man in justice. Klein went into thought as he tapped his glabella twice. The scene before him changed once again as he saw that his body had restored to a bright luster. He tapped twice again and stopped his spirit vision. Relaxed, he went to the first floor and boiled a kettle of water. He placed some inferior quality tea leaves and chewed on some rye bread dabbed in a little butter. Afterwards, Klein flipped through historical materials and original Klein's diary. He began revising and consolidating his knowledge. At 2:57 p.m., Klein closed his book and capped his fountain pen before pulling the curtains. Immediately following that, he locked the bedroom's door, making the room turn abnormally dark. He tapped his glabella twice and activated spirit vision to survey his surroundings. After confirming that there were no invisible spiritual bodies in his room, Klein stopped the spirit vision and took out his pocket watch to check the time. Tick-tock, tick-tock. 1 minute before 3, he opened up his pace and, like before, walked 4 steps in a counterclockwise manner in a squarish shape. He incanted in Chinese softly. Only this time, he did not prepare any staple food. Klein closed his eyes as he felt the back of his hands turn itchy. It felt like the 4 black dots forming a square was protruding and projecting something. Hysterical shouts and alluring murmurs began resounding, but Klein realized that the headache was not as bad as the first time. It was not that he was unaffected, but that he was doing his best to stop himself from listening. As a beyonder, he had to have more self-control in such an environment. Soon, his body turned light as he floated up. He saw the grayish-white and blurry fog that emanated. Then, he saw dark red stars. 2 of them had a minuscule connection with him, with an abnormal sense of familiarity. Klein looked at his blurry self and muttered in confusion, "The astral projection that old Neil mentioned?" He remained calm for a few seconds and again transformed the opulent divine palace with the tall bronze table under the domed ceiling, as well as the 22 high-backed chairs that corresponded to the different constellations. Klein calmly walked to the seat of honor and made his body and face be immersed in thicker gray fog. He extended his right hand and tapped 2 familiar deep red stars and created a miraculous connection. Chapter 34. Advance Payment. In an underground basement without any windows, the burly Alger Wilson sat by a long table with various apparatuses and goatskin parchments on it. In front of him was a half-consumed candle. The dim, yellowish flames flickering made the shadows of the objects and table move like a mirage. Alger's hair was disheveled like seaweed, with a deep blue color that resembled black. He wore a robe with lightning patterns embroidered on it. He clasped his hands with his thumbs facing each other while he focused on a bottle of black liquid to the left of the candle. Whoosh, 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 splash, splash, splash! The sound of tempestuous winds or the crashing of the sea waves howled from inside the sealed bottle, and in spots where the black ink did not sink, a faint fog would swirl. It was as though it grew eyes and a mouth. Alger cocked his head to glance at the clock hanging on the wall and watched the needle strike 3. He pressed down on his temple as his eyes turned dark. Fascinating colors surfaced from the various items on the table. At that moment, he discovered a deep red light appear like a tidal wave from nowhere, drowning him instantly. Backlund, Empress Borough, inside the Hall family's luxurious mansion. After dismissing her dance teacher, Audrey locked the door and sat straight up in front of her dressing table. The sun outside was bright and gorgeous. There was a light brown notebook made of exquisite goatskin. It was flipped open to reveal that it was blank. To its right was a fountain pen with a golden tip and embedded rubies. Audrey did a test and made sure that she could pick up the fountain pen and write down the formula the moment she left the gathering. "I'm so looking forward to it," she inhaled to repress her excited emotions as she looked at the mirror with puckered lips. However, she did not see it reflect herself. Instead, a dark red and illusory beam burst out from her body. Above the gray fog stood a majestic divine hall that looked like a giant's residence. Dark red colors bloomed on both sides of the bronze table. They surged upwards like a fountain before pattering down. It carved 2 blurry figures, who sat in the same spots as before. Audrey, with her soft blonde hair and tall, slim build, instinctively looked towards the seat of honor. She saw the figure immersed in thick gray fog sitting back. One hand was flat, touching the table's side, while the other hand was stroking his chin. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool," Audrey shouted with a cheery voice. Following that, she turned her head and looked at the person opposite her. With the same tone, she said, "Good afternoon, Mr. Hanged Man." This lady sure is unsophisticated. Is she so sure that I'm a good person? Why isn't there any fear from her? Is she a noble lady who has been protected well? Klein smiled and maintained his unfathomable image. "Good afternoon, Miss Justice." As he spoke, he lowered his head slightly and moved his left hand and tapped his glabella twice. What he saw changed instantly. He saw Justice and the Hanged Man emit the colors of their aura, and the surrounding gray fog and dark red stars remained the same. Nothing that seemingly did not exist or lustrous brilliances that possessed life was seen. He shifted his gaze and saw that Justice's aura perfectly matched the colors old Neil described. What was supposed to be red, purple, blue, or white were their respective colors. Furthermore, they maintained a lustrous brilliance and were of appropriate thickness. It was easy to tell that she was a vibrant young girl. The colors of her emotions are red and yellow. That's joy, zeal, and excitement. Klein made a judgment before casting his attention towards the Hanged Man. Like Justice, there was nothing special about the colors of the Hanged Man's aura. His emotions were blue, mixed in with some orange. Calm, thoughtful, careful, and a little pleased. With this being his first attempt, Klein made a conclusion without much confidence. Just as he shifted his gaze away, he suddenly realized something strange. The aura of the Hanged Man's innermost layer was nearly of the same color. Klein focused his mind and took another careful look. He could faintly see that deep within the Hanged Man's ether body was a deep blue, akin to the sea. It felt like a tidal storm. His astral projection? Or should I say the surface of his astral projection? From the looks of it, he's really a beyonder, and one that's apparently stronger than old Neil. Klein analyzed as his mind was filled with questions. Not necessary. It might have to do with this being a unique environment. It's only because this is my home ground that I'm able to see these things that old Neil did not manifest. He turned his head toward Justice again and confirmed that it was a characteristic only Beyonders possessed. At that moment, Alger also completed his greetings. Audrey drew a light gasp as she asked in anticipation, "Mr. Hanged Man, did you receive the box of ghost shark blood?" Alger took a look at Klein and saw him tapping his glabella as though he was considering other matters. "Thank you very much. It perfectly met my expectations. I never expected you to send it to me so quickly. The ghost shark blood is not the typical extraordinary creature," said Alger frankly. Audrey smiled humbly and said, "I'm very happy to see this outcome." As she loved anything to do with mystery from a young age, she had befriended those in aristocratic circles with similar interests. They have exchanged information, books, and rare artifacts among each other. But before this, none of them had ever obtained any supernatural power to become a real Beyonder. Instead, there were a few princes that hinted that they could gift them what they wanted if they became their princess consort. However, she had obtained the ghost shark blood directly from her family's vault. After all, the inventory only states one big bottle, without mentioning how many milliliters or how full it had to be. She believed that pouring a little bit of it would go unnoticed. Even if there was an accident and the matter was exposed, her parents were unlikely to pursue the matter. Alger looked deeply at the fool who was enveloped in fog before turning his head back with a smile. "According to our agreement, I will tell you the formula to the potion, Spectator. Let me prepare myself. All right? Begin." Audrey inhaled as she focused her full attention. "Low-sequence potions are very easy to concoct. Just follow the order that I provide you. Do remember that there can be smaller quantities of the ingredients, but not more. It would cause major problems. You should have heard about news of Beyonders losing control. I believe there's no need for me to repeat it. Alger first mentioned things to take note of. Audrey nodded gently and said, "I understand completely." While she spoke, she turned her head to look at Mr. Fool. She wished to know if the mystery expert had anything to add. Unfortunately, the fool was sitting silently there like a statue. Alger thought for a moment before saying, "Having smaller quantities does not mean it should deviate by too much. If you do not have an assistant, I suggest you spend some time familiarizing yourself with chemistry experiment." "I have a family tutor for such matters," answered Audrey without feeling the burden. After Alger mentioned the furthest extent of the deviation, he recited with great fluency, "Spectator, sequence 9 potion, 80 milliliters of pure water, 5 drops of autumn crocus essence, 13 grams of cow teeth payanol powder, 7 petals of elf flowers, a matured manhowl fish's eyeball. Add 35 milliliters of goat horn blackfish blood. The final 2 items are the main ingredients. They are extraordinary creatures from the sea. You have to be careful." "All right," Audrey recalled and repeated, 80 milliliters of pure water, 5 drops of autumn crocus essence, 13 grams of cow teeth. Payanol powder, reminded Alger. With his help, Audrey gradually and precisely memorized the formula's order. However, she appeared worried as she mumbled it again and again. "Do you know about cogitation?" When Alger saw Justice nod, he continued, "I do not know how much you know about cogitation. Let me describe it once. After consuming the potion, quickly begin cogitation to control your spirituality and energy. Make sure to practice every day to truly grasp the powers of the potion. Dig out the meaning it symbolizes and even more of its mysteries. That way, you can avoid the danger of losing control to the greatest extent. And the meaning of a potion mainly lies in its name, such as Spectator." Klein silently listened to the conversation and had no plans on interrupting. All he did was secretly memorize and study, but when he heard that, he suddenly had a thought. Audrey listened to the hanged man's explanations attentively, and just as she was about to inquire about something more detailed, she suddenly heard the rapping sound on the table. She and Alger turned their heads and looked at the fool. They realized that the mysterious and mighty figure was tapping gently with his fingers. He said in a deep voice, "It's not about grasping them, but rather digesting them. It's not about discovery, but rather acting. The name of a potion is not only symbolic, it's also imagery. It is the key to digesting." Audrey was dazed and confused from hearing that. She was not very clear on what Mr. Fool was trying to express. She subconsciously eyed the hanged man for a reaction from the corner of her eyes. She was surprised to see him jolt and freeze. It was as though an ordinary person had heard a loud and sudden clap of thunder. "Digesting, acting, digesting, acting, digesting, acting, key." Alger repeated it again and again, softly, as though he had grasped a key concept or had succumbed to a strange curse. After a while, he raised his head and said with a hoarse voice, "Thank you, Mr. Fool. Your hint is as valuable as my life. You have enlightened me greatly. Of course, I believe I have yet to fully understand or comprehend it." Klein maintained his mysterious and unfathomable image by saying with a smile, "That was an advance payment." In fact, he did not truly understand the exact meaning of what was said. He was just certain that Emperor Roselle was more powerful than the typical Beyonder and stronger than the hanged man. Advance payment? Audrey looked at the hanged man's reaction and knew that the hint from before was precious. As she ruminated over it, she asked, "Mr. Fool, what do you wish for us to do?" Opposite to her, Alger said with a nod, "What matter might you wish to entrust us with?" Klein leaned back slightly as he glanced at the two of them before saying in a soft and pleasant voice, "Collect Roselle Gustav's secret diary on my behalf, even if it's just 1 page of it.